Sony just handed majority control of its TV business to TCL. Now, before you panic and start thinking that Sony TVs are going away, they're not. In fact, if you're shopping for a Sony TV right now, you probably don't need to change your plans at all. But behind the scenes, something pretty major just changed, and depending on how this plays out, Sony TVs 5 years from now could feel very different from the way they are today. So in this video, I want to break down what actually happened, what's not changing, what might change, and most importantly, what this means for you as a buyer. Because honestly, this is one of the biggest TV industry shifts that we've seen in years. So here's the real story without all the panic headlines. Sony just finalized an agreement to create a brand new company called Bravia Inc. And this company will basically run Sony's TV and home theater business moving forward. But here is the important part that you need to know. TCL owns 51% of the company, whereas Sony owns 49%. This means that TCL has operational control. This includes manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, customer support, and basically the entire business side of making these TVs. Now, Sony is still involved, but their role shifts more toward technology and branding. So instead of Sony fully running its TV business, it becomes a joint operation between Sony and TCL, and that is a big shift. Now, here's the part that most people care about. If you're buying a Sony TV in the next year or two, nothing really changes. Seriously, Sony branding stays, and Bravia branding stays as well. Sony is still responsible for image processing, picture tuning, and audio technologies, which are honestly the things that Sony is best known for. That famous Sony picture quality, yeah, that's still going to be Sony. So if you're thinking about buying something like a Sony OLED or MiniLED TV today, this deal doesn't suddenly make those TVs worse, not even close. Now, where things change is behind the scenes. If you look at it historically, Sony had much tighter control over how their TVs were built, but now things are kind of different because Sony now focuses on just the technology, software, picture tuning, and brand identity, while TCL handles the heavy lifting. So future Sony TVs become Sony designed, but TCL produced, and that distinction matters long term. But you see, this move didn't just happen randomly. Sony TVs have always been premium, but they're also very expensive to build. Whereas when you look at TCL, one of the largest TV manufacturers in the world, they're extremely efficient at building TVs at scale. So this partnership actually gives Sony better manufacturing efficiency, lower operational costs, and stronger supply chains. And that could actually benefit consumers because one of Sony's biggest weaknesses historically has been price. And guess what? This news actually brings some real upsides for consumers. Upside number one, Sony TVs could get more affordable, especially in the mid-range segment. TCL specializes in building high-performance TVs at aggressive prices. So if Sony gets that efficiency, we might see better value Sony TVs, more competitive pricing, and stronger mid-tier models, and that's something that Sony fans have wanted for years. Upside 2, better supply and availability. Sony TVs have occasionally been hard to find, especially certain premium models. You see, TCL operates at massive global scale, so this could mean faster production, fewer shortages, and better product availability, which is honestly good for everyone. Upside number 3, stronger mini-LED TVs. TCL is incredibly strong in mini-LED technology, and that's actually one of their biggest strengths. So Sony benefiting from that experience could lead to even better mini-LED Sony TVs in the future. And that is something that I am personally very curious about. All right, so we talked about potential upsides. Now let's talk about potential concerns because there definitely are some. Risk number 1, quality control. You see, Sony built its reputation on premium quality. Not just good specs, but consistency, color accuracy, picture refinement, attention to detail. If TCL controls manufacturing, the big question becomes, can Sony maintain those same standards? Because right now, that's not going to be guaranteed, but it does depend on how tightly Sony stays involved. And to be honest, I'm sure they're going to be involved quite a lot. Risk number 2. Now, this was more subtle, but just as important. You see, Sony TVs historically feel premium, refined, and carefully tuned. TCL TVs, on the other hand, are more performance-driven and value-focused. So if those philosophies blend a little too much, then Sony TVs might lose some of that unique identity over time. Not immediately, but gradually. Risk number 3, premium positioning. You see, Sony has always positioned itself as a premium brand, not the cheapest, but one of the best, and TCL operates heavily in the value space. But there's a real tension here. Does Sony still stay premium, or do they slowly drift toward mass market pricing? Because that balance is going to matter a lot more than ever before. Alright, so now that we've discussed the potential pros and cons, this now brings us to the biggest unanswered question right now. Does Sony stay committed to OLED? You see, Sony makes some of the best OLED TVs on the market, but here's the key detail. Sony doesn't manufacture OLED panels themselves. They source them from companies like LG Display and Samsung Display. Meanwhile, TCL is not heavily focused on OLED. Their strength is when it comes to mini-LED. So long term, we have to ask, does Sony stay committed to OLED? Best case scenario, nothing really changes, and that's kind of what I'm more leaning towards. But the worst case is that OLED becomes less of a priority. And for enthusiasts like us, that would be a major shift. Now, another important detail that we need to discuss is timeline, because everything that we just mentioned today isn't happening overnight. The new company, Bravia Inc., is expected to start operations around 2027, which means that for 2026 buyers, there's not going to be any changes. And for 2027 buyers, there might be very minor changes. The real differences, however, will likely show up 2028 and beyond. So if you're buying a Sony TV today, you're not buying into some unknown future. You're just buying into what Sony already is. But personally speaking, if I had to give you my honest thoughts about all this, I don't think this is bad news. If anything, I feel like this could make Sony TVs more competitive, especially in the mid-range market. Is Sony partnering with a manufacturing powerhouse like TCL? Makes a lot of business sense. But long-term, that depends on one thing: whether Sony keeps control over what made their TV special in the first place. That picture processing, their tuning, their quality standards. If they protect those, this could be a win. If they don't, that's when things can get a little risky. This is one of those stories worth watching over the next few years. It's really hard to tell what's going to happen 10, 12, 15 years down the line. Not because Sony TVs are going away, but because how they're made is evolving, and that could shape the future of premium TVs. So if you're currently considering buying a Sony TV, or you already own one, let me know in the comments. Does this partnership concern you, or does it actually make Sony TVs more interesting? And as always, thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for all things TV and more, and I'll catch you in the next one.